I just spent 8 weeks rewatching Demon Slayer Season 4 frame by frame at 0.17x speed, and you won't believe these tiny 197 hidden details, like this one right here, or this one. I found that I bet no one in the entirety of the internet has found yet. For example, did you know that the myth surrounding Muzan was actually his own doing? Or this hidden detail in Sabido's sword during 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐤's flashback in episode 2. Or even that Haga actually made a mistake for the first time while attaching Rengoku's handle to Yoruichi's sword. Okay, the flow of facts is going crazy, so let's take it down a notch and discuss the hidden details in an episodic fashion. Starting with the first episode. At exactly 4 minutes and 13 seconds, we can see Sanemi easily dispatching some demons, but if you slow it down and look closely, all the demons are literally the same, just in different positions. Well, Ufotable had to save the budget somewhere. Following the Hashira's arrival, the other two slayers catch up soon. However, unlike Sanemi and Iguro, they are seen wearing bulky clothing to protect from the cold. Something the Hashiras don't need due to their body temperature being high as a result of constant breath control. After reaching the rooftop, Sanemi unleashes the coldest attack we've ever seen on Demon Slayer by unleashing the fourth form and bathing in the blood of the demons. In actuality, this attack was very similar to the one Akaza used on Rengoku, as he reached him only through the shockwaves of his fists, something that Sanemi here does with his sword. But there are even more, a bit boring, but the seasoned otaku fans will appreciate it. In the first few scenes, the abandoned castle that is raided by Sanemi and Iguro is actually inspired from an actual castle. Well, kinda like a mixture of two. You see, the whole of Demon Slayer takes place around the Tokyo Prefecture. And there are two old palaces that resemble the one in the story. The first being the Edo Castle ruins, and the second being the East Gardens of the Imperial Palace. As we see the demon running with the hostage, there's a huge question of why the demon didn't eat the woman on the spot like the other demons do. Well, as we later find out, the demon was actually stockpiling food for all the demons already inside. Which leads us to the next fact, that Muzan had put his plan in motion even before he found Kaguya, as he wanted to slaughter the whole core in the Infinity Castle and take out the Slayers by their roots to end them forever, righting a wrong that Kokushibo did 500 years ago by only killing the leader. As the episode progresses, we can also notice that Sanemi actually got a haircut and has shorter hair as compared to the medium-length locks he had in Season 1. I mean, you gotta keep the drip alive while killing the demons. In any case, when I closely looked at the demon who kidnapped the woman, I realized, man, I've seen him somewhere before. Well, the demon actually is very similar to the one 𝐥𝐤𝐤 fought in 𝐥𝐤𝐤 Gaiden, hence the similarity. But wait, won't 𝐥𝐤𝐤 Gaiden and Rengoku Gaiden have more hidden details? Well, worry not, I've got it covered, and we'll discuss those along with the whole story at the end of the video, so stick around. Moving on, at 2 minutes and 25 seconds, Sanemi is attacked by a fat demon who's almost identical to the one Inosuke cut in half in the Suzumi mansion. Man, Michael Jackson is really running out of ideas when it comes to his demons. Furthermore, as Iguro jumps in the air to save the other Slayers in the abandoned palace, we can clearly notice something similar we've seen before. The pattern of attacks Iguro uses is very similar to the ones Mitsuri uses, by inflicting multiple cuts on a victim with a Veiwi pattern. As the two Hashiras were cutting down demons like vegetables, I noticed that as soon as they decapitated, some of the demons vanished instantly. However, demons took time to vanish completely in the previous season. This could mainly be because all the demons present are mostly weak. As the fight progresses, we get a better look at Sanemi's design. However, even a blind man could spot the scars all over his body. You might think that these are battle scars, but in reality, they are self-inflicted by Sanemi to lure out and kill demons due to his Marechi blood. After clearing the lower floor, as the Slayers run towards the second level, right at 3 minutes and 22 seconds, we can see the rising sun on Sanemi's sword, which could indicate his survival after the final battle with Muzan. At 3 minutes and 34 seconds, as Obanai's sword path is traced by an imaginary snake, we can see that the snake has only the yellow color in both eyes, unlike the snake Hashira's heterochromia that makes one of his eyes blue and one yellow. Moving on, exactly 10 seconds later, we see Sanemi running at a high speed. But if you look closely, he grabs his sheet tightly so that it doesn't fall off, something we've seen Rengoku and Muichiro do in other seasons, as they're the only other Hashiras who use a normal katana and hence a normal sheath. I know these facts are insane, so you got to give me credit for literally watching at 0.17 speed and like. but we're only at episode 1 and it's only going to get crazier after this. So save your breath for subscribing after you're thoroughly impressed. Now, as 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐤 and Sanemi reach the roof, they fight purple demons which we've never seen before. There can be only 2 explanations for these. The first is that the animation budget was cut a bit, and they had to make some demons a bit unflashy. But for the second explanation, we see that the male demon that abducted the lady had purple hair, so the other demons could be the extensions of him. Like Rui had extensions of his family who looked similar. As more of 𝐥𝐤𝐤's fighting style is revealed, we can clearly notice that unlike any other Hashiras who mostly need some kind of footing to alter their attacks, 𝐥𝐤𝐤 can do them mid-air by changing the orientation of his body and generating leverage to deal a decisive cut. However, during all of his movements, Kubarumaru just stays there, almost like a silhouette with no motions whatsoever. There really is no explanation for this, but maybe the animator was focusing more on the epic fights instead of the inconsequential snake. Just kidding. The OG fans know that Kubarumaru is going to be the MVP soon. Moving on, the woman that is kidnapped is almost identical to the one in the Swap Demon arc back in season. There she has open hair and tinted blue eyes, but here she has her hair in a bun and her eyes are some shades of purple. But overall, it's like potato. After the fight concludes and the Infinity Castle closes, most of you must be wondering why doesn't Nakime just once again meet Kanao, who has just completed some sort of mission. Well, if you look closely, you could see that she doesn't have her sword, so maybe she could have just lost it or given it out to the swordsmiths for repair. At 7 minutes and 45 seconds as Kanao walks to the Butterfly Mansion, we can clearly point out that the trees behind her are not animation, but rather computer-generated imaging, much like Hantengu's dragons in Season 3. As she reaches the Butterfly Mansion, we can actually see Shinobu tending to her goldfish, which kinda negates the fact which 𝐥𝐤𝐤 told us in the Taisho era secrets, revealing that the insect Hashira hates any kind of animals. Also, stick to the very end of the video because we'll cover all the Taisho era secrets once again with extended information. After Shinobu gets up to leave, she requests Kanao to look after Nezuko instead of ordering her. This is actually a throwback to Kanao making progress with her decision-making ability taught to her by Tanjiro. Shinobu requesting Kanao signifies that the insect Hashira actually trusts her to make the right decision by herself. Aww, I really need to see Tanjiro and Kanao end up together ASAP. Moving on to the second and most important part of the second episode, we see 𝐥𝐤𝐤 crying when he's introduced. However, once he's informed of Kagaya's declining health, he stops his tears and instantly gets into a serious tone. And if you guys look a little bit more closely, there are stamps, more like Yushiro's talismans, all over 𝐥𝐤𝐤's haori that say something in Japanese. Well, the kanji translation literally means homage to the Buddha, which is quite standard for 𝐥𝐤𝐤's character. At 18 minutes and 32 seconds, as Moichiro explains how to summon the Demon Slayer mark, everyone turns around to listen, but 𝐥𝐤𝐤 doesn't because, you know, the guy's blind. What will he achieve by turning his head? However, one question comes to our mind when we see Lady Amane explain to everyone about the Demon Slayer mark. How did she even know that Moichiro and Mitsuri summoned them? Well, it was actually Ginkgo and Urara, the crows of Mitsuri and Moichiro, who watched the whole fight and noticed them all while relaying the information to Lady Amane. And talking about the Kasugai crows, did you know that each crow has his own personality, voice, and characteristics? But the most notable of them are their eyes, with each crow having a slightly different eye while being animated. Also, during the meeting, we see the Hashiras keep their swords on their right side, and let me tell you, that's very rare for samurais as they always keep their weapons on their left, ready to unsheath and attack. However, this only goes to show the trust they have in each other and the Ubuyashikis. And looking at their weapons, there are 2 more clues about the Hashira's weapons hidden there. If you notice, 𝐥𝐤𝐤 isn't carrying his weapon because his chain and axe, which is also sometimes called a kusari gama, are too big to carry with him to non-battle-like situations. And who wants to get their weapons dirty unnecessarily? Me personally, I keep my weapons hidden deep inside my pants. But worrying about dirtying their weapons is not the case for Sanemi, because if you look over at the sheath of his sword and compare it to the other Hashiras, it's torn off at multiple places and not well kept like the others. This actually shows Sanemi's no BS attitude, as he wouldn't replace the sheath due to it still being functional, although not very aesthetic. Back at the Butterfly Mansion, when we see Nezuko's eyes closely, we realize that they have the most similar characteristic when compared to Muzan's eyes, with vertical pupils and cracks surrounding them, but of different colors. Lady Tamayo and Yushiro two have similar eyes, but the characteristic cracks around the pupils are missing. Later, when Haginezuka is seen entering the recovery room, he's still struggling to walk, indicating that out of all the people that got injured, only he was the normal one, as the Hashiras and Tanjiro recovered at an almost inhuman rate, while Haginezuka was struggling with the effect of Gyoko's poison. When he handed Yorichi's sword to Tanjiro, did you notice that he actually put Rengoku's handle incorrectly? Well, if you noticed, during Rengoku's battle with Akaza, the flame of Rengoku's handle is towards the blade. However, Haginezuka fitted in a manner that they are away from the blade and towards the blunt side. Also, while Tanjiro unsheaths the sword already seems to be a black color. And if we go back several seasons to the blade Urokodaki gave Tanjiro for the first selection, which was blue, we can come to the conclusion that Nichiren blades change their colors only once. And for two of Tanjiro's swords, that was the case. However, one frustrating fact about Haginezuka and Tanjiro's relationship that troubles everyone is the constant abuse he makes Tanjiro go through, with Tanjiro never getting angry at him. Well, there's a hidden reason behind that as well. You know, Tanjiro can smell Haginezuka's rashness towards him, originating from his passion for sword making and also for his well-being, which is why he never gets angry. When Zenitsu visits Tanjiro, he bites his forehead in frustration, and in the very next second, you can see the bite marks on Tanjiro's forehead, signifying that there's actually something stronger than his forehead, and that is Zenitsu's Ultra Giga Chad jawline. And also, if you look back here at the end of the episode, you see that the window, which was earlier broken by Inosuke, had now been fixed by nailing wood over it. In this episode, we all see Tengen training the other Slayers, and like usual, he has his fingernails painted flamboyantly. But if you have two brain cells, you'll remember that he lost his other hand, which means that they were most likely painted by his wives. And finally, at the end of the episode, the most shocking part was not the discovery of Tamayo by Kagaya's crow, but the damn crow's voice itself, which was pretty deep and manly. Well, for a crow. But a fun fact about the crow is that he's voiced by Sho Hayami, who also voices Aizen in Bleach. I mean, where would the awesomeness come from, if not from Aizen himself? Maybe his plan transcends realities and leaked into the Demon Slayer world. Who knows? Going forward, I moved to episode 2, named Water Hashira, 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐤 Tomioka's Pain. And although the backstory of 𝐥𝐤𝐤 was very enticing and tear-jerking, I was able to find some things through the blurriness of my tearful eyes. But talking about backstories, I really need to get Kagaya's brother story out of my system, as it's making me cry. And for some reason, most of the fandom is unaware of it. You see, Kagaya had two younger brothers named Senri and Akito, who were left in his care after his father unalived himself. However, Senri, the middle child, grew depressed and refused to wear the girly clothing that was a tradition in the Ubuyashiki household to halt their diseases from spreading further. Later on, he grew so depressed and agitated that he burned down the Ubuyashiki mansion and forced Akito to commit a double unaliving inside the mansion. Kagaya's mother lost her life in an effort to save her children, but was only able to save Kagaya, who was left alone to handle the Demon Slayer Corps. Also, if you would have noticed, Rengoku's father Shinjuro was there to witness everything. Kagaya's father taking his life, then the whole family getting burned to their deaths, and finally, his own wife's death must have snapped him out of reality as he decided to spend the rest of his days drunk. Anyways, let's go back to the second episode. In the beginning, we see Yoshiro cleaning the bookshelves with a cloth over his face, indicating that even demons are germophobic. Just kidding. Had to make a joke after the depressing-ass story. Moving on, when we see Tamayo writing, and if you look over her nails, they're already pretty big and pointy. However, as we see in Muzan's case later on, he keeps them mostly normal and only flares them up with his blood when he has to attack. Also, we see that Tanayo is in the same yukata she wore in Season 1, but this transcends the normal notion of mangakas giving their characters only one pair of clothes for continuity. When we see the flashback of Tamayo and Muzan being confronted by Yorichi, she's still wearing the same yukata. This could actually be connected to another hidden detail, which I'll discuss later. However, one thing that you can notice as well is the color scheme of Tamayo and Muzan's clothes, which are almost opposite, indicating their different inclinations and philosophies. At 4 minutes and 59 seconds, we see Kagaya resting in his bed. However, the lamp beside him is not electric and is an oil lamp instead. We've seen in the Butterfly Mansion that they do use the electric bulbs in that era. However, Kagaya's usage of the oil lamp could be due to him keeping his location under wraps by not getting an electric connection. Also, we we see Aoi and Tanjiro talking in the background of the Butterfly Mansion with some hints of romantic tensions between them. And although Tanjiro seems aloof, it was later revealed after the story ended that Aoi actually liked Tanjiro. However, at the end, she chooses none other than the King of Mountains himself. Later on, when Tanjiro confronts 𝐥𝐤𝐤 in his dojo, he's seen pronouncing Hashiras as Bashiras, which is pretty common throughout the series. And we don't actually know if it's intentional or just a dialect thing. And afterwards, when Tanjiro is pestering 𝐥𝐤𝐤 about joining the Hashira training, he jokingly looks at an alley to search for any demons. However, he wasn't actually joking, as he first encountered the swamp demon in an alley. And it's very common for demons without any blood demon art to go through the alleys at night. Earlier, we talked about Saneemi's haircut and drip, but even an aloof 𝐥𝐤𝐤 is seen maintaining the color scheming of his covers, as you can clearly see the water breathing like patterns on them. During the Sabito flashback in Mount Fujikasane, we get a closer look at Sabito's sword. And if you look at his handle, it's almost similar to that of 𝐥𝐤𝐤, with just a slight difference in color shade, with 𝐥𝐤𝐤's being red and his being orange. There could be a chance that 𝐥𝐤𝐤 adopted the handle to honor Sabito's memory. After Sabito's death on the mountain, 𝐥𝐤𝐤 wakes up in the presence of Almighty Murata, who has been 𝐥𝐤𝐤's homie since day one as he carried 𝐥𝐤𝐤 on his back down the mountain. It's just that 𝐥𝐤𝐤 doesn't know about him, or does he? We'll find out about it later. And another thing that I noticed when 𝐥𝐤𝐤 visits a young Kagaya is that the pattern of the yukatas and his daughters are wearing is eerily similar to that of Tamayo in both pattern and color. I mean, all of these characters are wearing 5 centuries old drip. As we move on from 𝐥𝐤𝐤's flashback and onto Tanjiro's flashback, we actually see that Sabito's swords didn't have a tint when he was training Tanjiro at Mount Sagiri, but we can clearly see that in 𝐥𝐤𝐤's story, he has the light blue tint. Now, I'm going to lay out a very thick and juicy what if. What if the swords that Urokodaki gave to Sabito already had the blue tint? While in reality, if Sabito had passed the final selection, his original color would have been black, just like Tanjiro. Meaning he could have been the one that picked up the breath of the sun quickly, just like Tanjiro. At the end of the episode, we see Shinobu pretty mad at something while waiting for Kanao. It could actually be her frustration at Kagaya's decision for her to work with a demon, which in this case was Lady Tamayo. Also, she's been sitting behind a Tamaya, which is kind of like a portable shrine to honor the memories of the dead in Shintoism, which belongs to Kanae, who got killed and almost eaten by Doma, the Upper Moon too. And although the second episode was uneventful, the fun starts right here as we finally got to see some action in the third episode, which was actually kind of controversial according to some fans, but you'll eventually get to know why soon. In the manga, this entire episode was just a single page. Tanjiro comes in, runs up the mountain, and Tenjin just sends him on his merry way after only a few words with him, indicating that his stamina is quite high. But in the anime, they had a full fight sequence where Tenjin tests Tanjiro, which some fans believe was unnecessary, and a total cash grab to elongate the series even more. However, still, we got some pretty well animated frames within the episode, as you can see right here that Tanjiro has these 4 deep scars from his previous battles. Well, the vertical one was given to him by Daki during the rooftop fight in Season 2, and the 3 horizontal ones were inflicted on him by Hantengu. If those wounds were just a few inches deep, they could have easily ripped Tanjiro's heart out. But anyway, our best boy is still going strong. At 9 minutes, when 𝐥𝐤𝐤 is seen competing with Tanjiro in a soba eating contest, it could very well be the same shop that 𝐥𝐤𝐤 visited with his subordinate at the beginning of the Mugen Train arc. Later in the episode, when Obanai and Saneemi hold a little get-together, we see the bandages of Saneemi's handle, probably due to the damage caused by his rough usage of the sword. However, he just wraps a bandage around it instead of actually getting it fixed by a swordsman, which is so in character for Saneemi. And if you see the shrine behind Saneemi and Obanai, it would actually make the OG fans of the channel remember something. Remember how we theorized a shrine in the What If Yuichiro Was Alive video? And this shrine is literally what I imagined. If you haven't seen it, click on the top right corner and save it for later. If that video gets more views, maybe we could be able to mark the following parts. During the last bout with Tanjiro, Tenjin is actually using his old shinobi techniques to lurk in the shadows and avoid detection in the dark. But another fact related to this technique is that Tenjin is also actively hiding his scent, as he knows that Tanjiro was able to follow him around in the entertainment district using his scent, which he makes sure to hide here. Lastly, when Tenjin and Tanjiro go head-to-head, most of you would have noticed that both the Slayers are using different practice swords. Tenjin is actually using a shinai, which is mostly used by kendo players, whereas Tanjiro and the others are using a wooden replica of the usual katanas. Also, during their clash, we clearly see that when Tanjiro and Tenjin strike their swords, the sheer force of the impact is making the wood chip piece by piece, which is very well animated in the scene. And lastly, Tanjiro is actually doing a pretty good job keeping up with Tenjin here, because as you can remember, the first time Tanjiro went in to attack Tenjin, he practically vanished in front of the butterfly mansion, and that too with the 3 girls in his arm. In this fight, Tanjiro has obviously grown exponentially and is able to keep up with Tenjin. But you know, this episode was just the tip of the iceberg, and the story just starts going haywire henceforth, and so do the hidden details. So let's move on to episode 4, titled To Bring a Smile to One's Face. 2 minutes into the episode, Muichiro seems to be training the Slayers harshly. However, if we look closely here, when he disarms a Slayer, he takes cognizance of their body and only hits the wooden part of the handle to disarm them so that they don't get hurt unnecessarily. Also, as soon as Tanjiro reaches the dojo, Muichiro actually reverts back to his personality, which is very mellow and sweet, that he regained along with his memories in the Swordsmith Village arc. However, he also retains parts of his brother's cold personality, which he displays while training the other Slayers. Later, we see Tanjiro and Zenitsu's crow fighting in the background, and trust me, there's a lot to unpack there, which I'll do later on in the video. However, Tanjiro's crow, aka Matsuemono, is actually the rudest of them all, and he doesn't like the crow whatsoever, fairly often taunting them to just get lost and just die. He even continues this banter with Hashibami, Genya's crow, stating that he's ugly. As we delve deeper into the episode, the plans of Muzan are somewhat revealed, and we see the numerous eyeballs that Nakime controls. However, if you look closely, the eyeballs don't have any muscles, but are actually being controlled by Nakime's hair extensions, which also work as transmitters. During Obanai's practice fight with Sanemi, we can see that both of them are evenly matched in terms of skill, but we all know that Obanai actually uses a zigzag blade, so given that he was using a straight one here, he can actually be a level above Sanemi if he's able to use his action. As Muichiro arrives to spar the Hashiras, his first attack is actually his last from the previous season, which is the 7th form. He feints his speed and makes the other Hashiras believe that he's going for Obanai, but just like in his fight with Gyokko, he changes his tempo in the midst and goes for Sanemi instead. Well, if he would have trash-talked a bit, this fight could have been even better. With the continuation of the fight, we can see literal glimpses of ember light up around the Hashiras, which is actually due to the speed of their attacks. If you noticed previously with Tanjiro's fight with Tenjin, there was only the residue of wood chips when fighting Tenjin. However, in this case, those chips have been lit on fire due to the friction they had to go through. At the end of the 5th episode, we see a complete 180-degree turn in Muichiro's personality, which wasn't explored in the manga, as it was literally a few pages long. However, Muichiro, after training the Slayers, expresses his emotions and reveals that he actually wants everyone to live a long and healthy life, which is very out of character, even for him, as he was about to let Kotetsu die a season prior. In the next episode, which is titled I Even Ate Demons, Tanjiro goes on to the fandom's favorite Hashira for her blossoming personality. But this episode too has some missed hidden details. And yeah, I still plan on discussing both the Rengoku and 𝐥𝐢𝐤𝐤𝐷𝐷 facts, but you'll have to watch the whole video to get to them. In any case, as Tanjiro enters Mitsuri's house, we can clearly see a stark difference between her and other Hashira's residences, because Mitsuri's home is very modern with hinged doors and big windows like the dojos of other Hashiras. Later on in the episode, when Tanjiro moves on to Obanai's training, we can clearly see that initially he was so excited to train under Obanai that his legs were shaking. But as soon as Obanai shut him down due to his jealousy over his relationship with Mitsuri, his excitement vanished into the air. This episode is very close to the manga in terms of story. However, here in the anime, Obanai clearly states that he has specially made a training ground for Tanjiro, while in the manga he was just punishing the other Slayers for being weak and had tied them irrespectively. But if you remember, Tanjiro is actually given more importance by Obanai because he also remembers the last moments of the entertainment district where he was praised by Tenjin. So even though he hates his guts, Obanai cannot deny the fact that Tanjiro may go on to become one of the strongest. Also, during the training, it actually becomes very hard for Tanjiro to mentally block out all the obstacles because he can actually smell the fear of the Slayers oozing out into the air. This makes him overly cautious, causing him to overthink and slow down his movements. As Tanjiro moves on to Sanemi's training, he encounters Sanemi and Zenitsu, but as they move on to the dojo, we can clearly see this weird animation of Matsuemono, which doesn't really fit in with the surroundings. I mean, he's flapping his wings, but still going so slow. In any case, it actually feels good to pick mistakes in Ufotable's unbelievable animation. Anyways, near to the end of the episode, when Sanemi attacks and tries to blind 𝐥𝐤𝐤, it's not what you think. You see, Sanemi was inducted into the Demon Slayer Corps by a slayer named Masachika Kumeno, who died fighting with him during the battle against Lower One Moon Ubume, who was just a few leagues below Gyotaro in terms of strength. And once 𝐥𝐤𝐤 approached 𝐥𝐤𝐤 after so long, he actually saw hints of Masachika's personality in him. Fearing that this would also lead him to a gruesome death, Sanemi decided to just incapacitate 𝐥𝐤𝐤 right here and throw him out of the Demon Slayer Corps while he has the chance. Well, that's his way of love, I guess. But going forward in the season, I still wasn't satisfied with what I found. So I put on my Sherlock Holmes cap and got on with the 6th episode titled The Strongest of Them All. And boy, it didn't disappoint. The waterfall training that the 𝐥𝐤𝐤 makes the Slayers do is not just for looking cool, it actually has a major history. The training is known as Takigyo. It has several functions. In Shinto and Buddhism, waterfalls are often seen as manifestations of deities, and standing under them allows you to get closer and connect with them. It's also used as a form of mental toughness training. Between the cold temperatures and the weight of the water, it forces you to grit down and bear it. After all, it's supposed to be getting in touch with deities. Finally, it's a form of physical training. The weight of that volume of water coming down on you from height is a lot harder to endure than it seems. Effectively, it's simulating an increase in gravity. Now, we kind of know how 𝐥𝐤𝐤 got so big. Later on, when Zenitsu falls unconscious after listening to 𝐥𝐤𝐤's training protocol, the Stone Hashira advises him to put him in the water. This too is not just for comedic effect, as the air pressure is low on mountains and oxygen is less as well. Sometimes the body goes into a depressive state due to lack of oxygen. To prevent this, 𝐥𝐤𝐤 proposes to throw Zenitsu in the river to shock his body back into normalcy. After training, we see Lord Murata and the others sticking to the rocks to gain a bit of heat. This is also due to the fact that stones around the waterfall absorb as well as dissipate less energy to and from the environment, which makes the temperature slightly higher than that of the surroundings. However, this also proves one of the points I highlighted earlier on in the series. Swordsmen who are well-versed in breathing techniques are able to keep their temperatures higher, which in this case are Tanjiro, Inosuke, and 𝐥𝐤𝐤. Zenitsu too could have been able to do it if he would just stop bitching about everything. Later on, we also see Shintaro, the only carrier bird in the series, deliver a letter to Zenitsu. While I'll spoil the contents of the letter later on, there's actually quite a bit of history between Shintaro's induction in the Demon Slayer Corps. Shintaro's whole clan used to be allied to the Slayers. However, most of them were wiped out by a demon attack. At the end, Shintaro, who was too cowardly to fight, survived and vowed to help the Slayers any way he could. But the pairing of Shintaro and Zenitsu actually turned out to be pretty useful. You see, Shintaro was assigned to Zenitsu because of his sensitive hearing, as the cackle of the crow might have been too much for Zenitsu to handle. Plus, they're both cowards, so there's that angle as well. And during the end of the episode, we finally see Tanjiro willingly summon the Demon Slayer mark for the first time. And this is where it kind of becomes permanent. Later on during the episodes, we see it still being there. But if you see the growth of the mark and compare it to Season 2, when he decapitated Gyotaro, you can clearly see that during his fight with the Upper Moon 6, he had 2 extensions come out on his forehead. However, here, the Demon Slayer mark is small compared to the one in Season 2. But as I said, this isn't even the tip of the iceberg, as we're only halfway across the video. It's kinda like furthest from the tip. In any case, we move on to the 7th episode, titled Stone Hashira, 𝐥𝐤𝐤 Himejima. As the episode begins, we see Inosuke witnessing Tanjiro move the boulder. He gets extremely jealous, but instead of bitching about it like Zenitsu, he goes on to motivate himself with none other than tempura, which we see him eating at the end of the series. Right then, Tanjiro moves the boulder one chol, he faints. However, this is not just due to dehydration. Right here, Tanjiro is suffering from a medical condition called PEES, also known as Post-Extreme Endurance Syndrome, which is characterized by a sudden decrease in body temperature, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, dizziness, headache, muscle cramps, and an inability to drink fluids. Which takes us to another fact, which explains why 𝐥𝐤𝐤 was literally pouring water over his mouth even though it was outflowing. Because 𝐥𝐤𝐤 knew that if Tanjiro was going through PEES, he would soon be unable to keep his liquids down, so he intends to give them to him quickly. 𝐥𝐤𝐤 is really a gentle giant. In any case, we see that 𝐥𝐤𝐤 has flared up veins in his forearms, which are majestic if you talk about them. However, this could be due to the fact that he was himself training to summon the Demon Slayer mark nearby. Also, talking about 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐤's forearms, they're actually vital to the story as he summons his first Demon Slayer mark on them. While this is very surprising because he is the first ever Slayer to summon a Demon Slayer mark somewhere so away from the head, while the other Slayers awaken their marks right on their heads or faces. And this fact held true even during the Taisho era, as all Slayers had marks on their faces as described by Amane. As the episode progresses, we see 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐤's backstory. However, one thing that I couldn't help but notice was that along with his muscles, 𝐥𝐤𝐤 has also gained a lot of mass in his eyebrows, which are visibly bigger than the ones he had as a teenager. And if we take a closer look at the demon who confronted 𝐥𝐤𝐤, we can see that he has his demon crest on his shoulders, unlike the demon from episode 1 who had his crest on his face. Also, if you noticed, many demons like Gyotaro, Daki, Kyogai, Rui, etc. have demon crests on their faces or nearby, signifying that they're far superior to other demons who don't have crests, like the swamp demon that Tanjiro faced and the demon that killed Yuichiro. So the demon crests are like the antimatter to the matter of the Demon Slayer marks. Coming back to the Demon Slayer's past, many people misread the situation with 𝐥𝐤𝐤 and his feelings after Sayo misled the people. Now, 𝐥𝐤𝐤 has become mistrusting of kids because of their lying habits. However, he doesn't hold hatred towards them, making him true to his character of being a benevolent monk. Zenitsu also receives a letter in the beginning of the series, which is a plot point that had been brewing in the background since Season 1. If you remember Zenitsu's backstory from Season 1, he had a senior while he was training under Jigoro. This senior turned out to be none other than Kaigaku, who originally betrayed 𝐥𝐤𝐤 at the temple and now had betrayed the whole Demon Slayer Corps. This brought shame to the name of Jigoro as the former Thunder Hashira, forcing him to commit the S-word, also known as seppuku in Japanese culture, by slitting his guts through a blade. But in Jigoro's case, this was even more brutal. You see, when a samurai commits seppuku, another swordsman immediately cuts off his head to relieve him of pain and suffering. However, in Jigoro's case, he had to suffer alone and die slowly, bleed to death, while remembering Kaigaku and Zenitsu in his last breaths. This was also the reason we see Zenitsu bleeding as Tanjiro comes to check on him. This may be due to Zenitsu banging his head on the boulder due to his frustration and inability to get stronger. But all in all, after Zenitsu is locked in, we know that something thunderous is going to happen in the final arc. As Tanjiro descends and witnesses 𝐥𝐤𝐤 and Sanemi fighting, we can see that unlike the fights of the other Hashiras, there are no embers being shot off from their blades. This is due to 𝐥𝐤𝐤's water-breathing technique as a whole, which focuses mainly on flexibility and evasions. So instead of clashing his sword head-on with Sanemi, 𝐥𝐤𝐤 is basically gliding past his attacks and initiating counterplay swiftly. The only solid move he throws out here is the 7th form, which is a stabbing thrust, one of the bluntest attacks in the water-breathing forms. Also, you would have noticed that Sanemi's eyes are always bloodshot. Now, we don't know the reason for it. However, what I know is that Sanemi actually went colorblind after he witnessed his mother dissolve into ashes through the rising sun. That, combined with the trauma of Genya blaming him, kind of took root into his sight, making it defective. After the fight between 𝐥𝐤𝐤 and Sanemi ends, we can see Sanemi pushing on 𝐥𝐤𝐤 for a fight to the death. After Tanjiro stops them, making Sanemi even more angry. Now, I realize something here. Sanemi hates Tanjiro for one specific reason, and that is his thinking. You see, Tanjiro is on the optimistic side of the spectrum, while Sanemi is on the pessimistic side. And it irks Sanemi that not only has Tanjiro achieved considerable success with his positive attitude, he's also roped in Genya, whom he wants to keep as far away from the battle as possible. Also, we see another parallel here between Tanjiro and 𝐥𝐤𝐤, as 𝐥𝐤𝐤 makes a pillow for Tanjiro with his Haori, something Tanjiro did for Inosuke in the Suzumi Mansion arc. Now, towards the end of the episode, during the fight around him, he's literally oozing away the moisture in the air. And finally, when Muzan is fully revealed, we see that he's wearing the exact opposite colors to when he met Tanjiro. Now we're finally here, the last episode of the Demon Slayer Hashira training arc, which was peak hype, but what's even more hype are the hidden details that I found. And if you look at it at a slower pace, you can tell the difference very clearly. As Tanjiro follows 𝐥𝐤𝐤 to the mansion, we can see that he has mastered the mark, and it has been made permanent on his forehead. Kanzaburo. You see, unlike the other crows in the series, Kanzaburo is the oldest of them all, and oftentimes forgets to relay messages to 𝐥𝐤𝐤, which adds to the worries of the water Hashira. I mean, if you look at it this way, Kanzaburo could be the reason behind 𝐥𝐤𝐤 arriving a little late at Mount Naragumo, almost getting Tanjiro killed. As Muzan tries to recuperate after the explosion, we see that the crotch part of Muzan's pants has survived, which leads us to believe that Michael Jackson borrowed his pants from the Hulk himself. Just kidding. That really reminded me of the Tenjin vs. Gyutaro fight. It was amazing! Later on, when Nakime is pulling all the Slayers into the Infinity Castle, we see Genya practicing with his gun, but his shooting stance seemed to be strange. You see, the double-barrel gun has a powerful recoil, so if you're extremely strong, you could pull off a few shots with a straight arm. But Genya here was able to pull off multiple shots with a bent arm, which shows he has phenomenal strength despite lacking breathing techniques. Also, one thing that many fans had noticed in the background lighting when all the Hashiras entered the Infinity Castle, well, I'm not going to spoil much, but characters such as Tanjiro, who are obviously going to survive the final fight, had a yellow light behind them while entering the castle, while the other Slayers had a red light behind them, indicating that they could die or suffer fatal wounds in the final battle. On to show how much she'd grown since the first season. If it was the Kanao from before she met Tanjiro, she would have just let the Slayer fall to his death. And lastly, a very telling throwback is given by the author Koyoharu Gotoge by making the last day of the story same as the first day, snowy and dark, as Tanjiro lost everything on a snowy morning and Muzan is about to lose everything in a snowy morning as well. Wait, did we actually go through the whole series? No, this can't be right. Well, it isn't, because the hidden details in the intro and outro are still left. So let's get on with them. As you can see, Kagaya is paying his respects to the fallen Slayers in a huge cemetery that's full of Demon Slayer tombstones. This is the same place that is shown at the end when Kagaya talks to Muzan about the inherited will of the Slayers. We also see that almost every Hashira is in the opening except for Muichiro, and I kind of have a theory for it. You see, Muichiro might have been animated just where the Demon Slayer logo is due to his height, but would be removed later by the animators so that they could put the logo in. Later, we see Genya training with visible scars on his body, but he has demonic regeneration, right? Well, my theory is that Genya got those scars when he wasn't able to consume the flesh of a demon and had to heal them the old way. Because, you know, even if he does eat the flesh of the demons, he only gets their powers for a limited time. Right at the opening, we see a giant snake behind Kagaya, which was actually foreshadowing Muzan's fate and how Kagaya was going to bite him in the ass. Oh, I mean how Kagaya was about to exact his revenge like a jolted snake with no remorse. And talking about the outro, there was nothing much to see except the killings in the shadows, which kind of displayed his history, how he killed his doctor and then went on to murder the entire army and their leader, which could have been the Shogun, but we never know. This was actually shown in the previous season in the last episode. Also, we see Muzan stepping on 6 berries with only one being able to withstand the step and the other getting crushed. This could be a nod towards how Muzan slaughtered Tanjiro's family with only Tanjiro left to avenge them. Oh, this was long. Actually, pretty long. But why do I sense that I'm missing something? Well, I did promise to give you a few hidden details from the 𝐥𝐤𝐤 Shinden and Rengoku Shinden, along with a few Taisho-era secrets, so let's get at them. Now, when 𝐥𝐤𝐤 met Shinobu at the Matagi Mountain, we came to realize that Demon Slayers aren't the only faction that hunts something for a living. Among the mountains, there also lives Matagi Hunters, who sometimes also gun down aggressive bears that threaten the safety of the people around the mountain. Also, later on in the manga, we found out that 𝐥𝐤𝐤 gets arrested, that he is also a wanted man around Mount Kumotori, as he was the last one seen roaming around Tanjiro's house before the whole family was murdered and 2 siblings went missing. Well, it's actually funny thinking that even if 𝐥𝐤𝐤 did get caught, Kagaya would have to bail him out, which would be embarrassing. Later on, when we see the actual demon, he's revealed to have a blood demon art that is very similar to that of Gyutaro. Well, this man was able to manifest sickles out of his flesh, something that Gyutaro was able to do as well. However, Gyutaro was actually manipulating his blood, which was poisonous as well. But this demon's blood demon art also resembled Kokushibo's blood demon art, as his sword is literally an extension of his flesh, which was shown in his fight against the Slayers later in the manga. But this was mostly it for 𝐥𝐤𝐤 Gaiden. However, when it comes to Rengoku Gaiden, we get more juicy details and even a bit of backstory on Mitsuri's rookie days. This is the first time most of our wild dreams come to reality, as we see a demon that actually uses guns. Well, we were kids hoping for a slayer that uses guns, but whatever. Although, what I'm getting at is that the demon in question here is named 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐤, which is actually the only human-sounding name that I've seen a demon have so far. Also, this is the first time we see Mitsuri as a rookie demon slayer who cracked the final selection with a mere 6 months of training. Comparing that to Tanjiro, he trained for a whole 2 years and only made it through the final selection after grueling training under Urokodaki. Although there is a case to be made that if Tanjiro were to take the exams early and not face the hand demon, he could have passed as well. But in any case, we also see the most awaited thing in the manga, Rengoku's reaction to seeing Mitsuri in her perverted uniform for the first time, which actually blows his brains away in shock, making him question everything. However, Mitsuri replies that it's an official uniform that a Kakushi made, which Rengoku actually accepts. Thus, the perverted Kakushi was able to fool not one, but 2 future Hashiras. Classic! Later on, we see Rengoku attending the pillar meeting at the behest of his father, and we're kind of forced to see a parallel to that of Tanjiro's first meeting. All the Hashiras are in their usual moods, with Sanemi picking on and edging Rengoku to test his mettle, only to get shut down by the future flame pillar with mere words. Later, we also see Tengen making fun of Sanemi, indicating that he and Kyojuro are going to be best buds in the near future. Also, one weird thing that we did notice here was the absence of Kanae. According to his calculations, either Kanae was supposed to be here or there should have been no sign of Shinobu, but she was present. This could lead us to the conclusion that Shinobu was actually very highly ranked when she became a Hashira. In the flashbacks of 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐤, Rengoku's father is seen to be a freaking menace. I mean, the guy was able to bring down a lower moon while drunk and handling his katana with a single hand. I think he could have been a strong candidate to inherit the sun breath if Tanjiro ever taught it to anybody. Now, I think we've seen enough of the uptight facts about the Slayers and their stories, so let's just move on to the short, sweet, quirky Taisho-era facts revealed by the author. Did you know that Urokodaki wears a mask because his face is too kind for demons to take seriously? Or it might be too funny as well, because we saw 𝐥𝐤𝐤 and Sabido laughing at him after they saw his face in episode 2. Also, Tanjiro stated that Jigoro had to slap Zenitsu into going to the final selection as he wasn't ready to show up to the exam. Tanjiro also reveals that Yushiro keeps a journal describing Lady Tamayo and he regularly fills in at least 7 to 10 pages. However, when Tanjiro decided to read it, he was traumatized enough in the first 2 pages and he didn't want to read the remaining part. Later, Tanjiro reveals Matsumono's full name is actually Matsumono Tennoji, and that the crow was so smart that he named himself after birth. However, remember I said that there is a very long history between Matsumono and Muichiro's crow, Ginkgo. Well, after the story is over, Ginkgo falls severely ill and gets isolated. This when she's approached by Matsumono as he nurses her back to health. Later on, the 2 crows go on to get married. Also, Tanjiro was able to figure out Inosuke's pattern of speech as he discovered that he was able to take the correct name of a person out 1 of 7 times. I mean, okay, that is an improvement. Also, as I mentioned before in the video, 𝐥𝐤𝐤 reveals that Shinobu absolutely hates dogs, cats, and other furry animals. Also, her only having goldfish as pets and avoiding the girl's dog in 𝐥𝐤𝐤 Shinden only solidifies this claim, despite Shinobu claiming that 𝐥𝐤𝐤 is lying. Another fact relating to Shinobu, you might have wondered that Shinobu teaches Kanao mostly the fighting techniques, so who is she passing on her medicinal skills to? Well, it's none other than Aoi, who is able to concoct basic medicines under Shinobu's teachings. Also, after the series ends, she becomes the main doctor of all the Slayers that survived the final battle against Muzan. Back in Season 2, we saw Zenitsu playing the shamisen vigorously, which freaked out the other entertainers. However, he's actually very good at playing the instrument and often pushes himself to be better. Also, if you remember the flamboyant muscle mice from Season 2, Tengen revealed that he only trained mice who were narcissistic enough to get lost in their own muscles and laid it out as a requirement to get trained by him. And a few facts about the Wind Ashira, Sanemi actually likes collecting rhinoceros beetles and has many as pets. Another fact that I was dying to share with you is how demons see the different breathing styles of the Hashiras. There was actually a volume where the slain demons in hell describe how they felt getting beheaded by different breathing techniques. The demons explained that getting slain by water breathing gave them very gentle pain, and they were glad to be slain by a water breather. Wind breathing was the most painful and, in the demon's own words, hurt more than hell itself. Kanae's and Kanao's flower breathing was the only breathing style gentler than water breathing, with some of the demons even blushing while reminiscing about them. Moving on, the demons slain by Shinobu explained that while the pain was somewhat stingy, what got them was the helplessness of being poisoned and there was nothing they could do about it. The demons, including Kokushibo, that were slayed by stone breathing were actually more impressed by Gyome rather than his breathing technique itself, comparing the stone Ashira to a benevolent king. When asked about their thoughts on flame breathing, the demons revealed that they were actually afraid at first, but after it happened they saw a clear blue sky beyond the flames. The demons cut by snake breathing were still questioning on how Obanai was able to cut them like that. However, the death was still painful due to Iguro's strong hatred. Love breathing was the only technique which kinda made the demon's heart flutter like the one slayed by flower breathing. Sound breathing was actually praised by everyone due to its clean cuts, and even Gyotaro praised Tengen. However, Daki just pouted and said that she hated it. Mist breathing was also dwarfed due to the personality of Moichiro, which was stingier than the cut itself. One demon even stated that Moichiro thought he was lower than vomit. And lastly, Muzan revealed that sun breathing was very unpleasant, while Hantengo couldn't even form words and just cried in the background. Okay, this is it. Comment your favorite one down below and share it with your friends. I'm working extra hard on the upcoming videos, so you can see these ones till then.